The District of Columbia Organic Act of 1871 isn't something most Americans even know about today, but it was a turning point that every citizen should understand. Not necessarily because it secretly turned the United States government into a municipal corporation, but because it laid the foundation for the centralized federal powerhouse we now call Washington, D.C. It created an environment where Congress governs itself in a protected bubble, free from most of the checks that exist in the rest of the country. And that insulated environment is exactly where the modern D.C. machine grew. The 1871 Act reorganized Washington City, Georgetown, and the surrounding county into a single municipal government, literally called a municipal corporation. That's not a corporation like Ford or Amazon. It simply means Congress created a unified city government to manage the capital. The Constitution gives Congress complete authority over the district, and after 1871, Congress leaned into that authority more aggressively. Instead of Washington functioning as just the seat of the federal government, it became a fully centralized enclave where federal agencies, politicians, and bureaucrats could operate without the state-level constraints the framers designed. You can draw a straight line from that moment to the explosive growth of federal power in the 20th century. When you centralize jurisdiction, you create bureaucracy. When you create bureaucracy, you create unaccountable power centers. And when those power centers aren't answerable to the states or the people, they grow into what we now recognize as the D.C. establishment. That establishment eventually paved the way for major federal expansions, including the Federal Reserve Act of 1913. While the 1871 Act didn't create the Fed, it absolutely created the conditions where a central bank could be pushed through by political insiders working hand in hand with banking elites. Over time, the District of Columbia became more than just a capital. It became, honestly, a fortress of centralized authority. Congress controls the city. Congress controls its laws. Congress controls its budget, and the federal agencies housed within it became shielded from the same accountability local governments face. No governor can pressure them. No state legislature can restrain them. And no voters in the 50 states can elect or remove the people running the agencies that shape their daily lives. That's really the core of the problem. The United States is supposed to be a constitutional republic, self-governing, decentralized, balanced by the states. But the D.C. structure turns that upside down. Instead of the federal government serving the states, it often feels like the states serve the federal government, and instead of Congress answering to the people, Congress answers to itself. So the real question is, how do we reverse this without shocking the public or disrupting ordinary life? Politicians may not like the answer, but regular Americans deserve it. The first step is restoring the 10th Amendment in practice, not just in theory. Most federal overreach comes from agencies and congressional interpretations that stretch their powers way beyond what the Constitution authorizes. States can push back, directly and decisively. Governors and attorneys general already have the authority to challenge unconstitutional federal actions. If multiple states act in unison, Washington really has no choice but to pull back. This isn't rebellion, it's federalism. It's the system the founders intended. Next, we can start decentralizing federal agencies. There is no reason the Department of Agriculture needs to sit in D.C. instead of the Midwest. There is no reason the Department of Energy can't be headquartered in Texas. Moving agencies out of Washington weakens the D.C. culture of insider access. It forces federal employees to live among the people affected by their decisions. And it breaks up the unhealthy concentration of power that fuels corruption. Another practical step is ending the Federal Reserve's immunity from public scrutiny. You don't need to abolish the Fed to rein it in. You need to audit it, restrain it, and prevent it from using its power to bail out politically favored banks. States should be allowed, if they choose, to use gold and silver as legal tender, giving Americans an alternative to a currency controlled by unelected policymakers. That's a constitutional approach to restoring financial independence from Washington's centralized system. We can also pursue targeted constitutional amendments through the states, without opening the door to a runaway convention. Amendments that impose term limits, require a balanced budget, restrict federal bureaucracy, and clearly define the limits of federal authority would all help restore the republic. These aren't radical ideas. They're widely supported by conservatives and many independents. Another path is simply reducing D.C.'s local political power. Congress could restructure the district, limit home rule, and scale back unnecessary municipal authority. D.C. was never meant to be a political empire. It was meant to be an administrative seat of government. Returning it to that limited role would strip away a great deal of local corruption and influence. And finally, states can form compacts that set shared standards for election security, immigration enforcement, and regulatory boundaries. When enough states act together, the federal government has to respect it. This is how the balance of power was designed to work, and how it should work again. The benefits of returning to a true constitutional republic are enormous. The federal government becomes smaller and more accountable. States regain the authority the Constitution originally gave them. Corruption becomes harder to hide. Bureaucrats lose the ability to write laws from behind a desk. The federal budget becomes more disciplined, and individual freedom expands naturally, because power moves closer to the people rather than farther away. Most importantly, it rebuilds trust. Americans are losing faith in their institutions not because they hate government, but because government has grown too distant and too unaccountable. Bring power back to the states and the people, and trust returns. The District of Columbia Organic Act of 1871 may not have been the moment the Republic ended, but it was the moment the federal government began building a fortress around itself. If we want a healthier nation, that fortress has to come down. Not through chaos, not through shock, but through disciplined constitutional restoration. The founders gave us the blueprint. The states hold the authority, and the people still have the power to demand it.